The cold Montana wind swept through the cemetery as Lillian O'Brien stood motionless before the fresh grave of her husband, Thomas. The year was 1878, and at 26, Lillian found herself alone with a small ranch to manage and a heart that felt as barren as the winter plains stretching before her. She clutched the folded American flag to her chest, the only tangible reminder of the man who had promised her forever, but delivered only 3 short years. "Time heals all wounds, Mrs. O'Brien," Reverend Miller said gently, placing a weathered hand on her shoulder. "And perhaps when you're ready, you might find happiness again." Lillian's mother-in-law stepped forward, her face pinched with grief and disapproval. "Nonsense. A proper widow honors her husband's memory. Lillian should focus on maintaining the ranch, not entertaining foolish notions of romance again." The words stung, but Lillian remained silent. What did it matter anyway? Love had come and gone like the spring rains, brief, nourishing, but ultimately leaving only mud in its wake. "I'll be fine," she whispered, more to herself than to the small gathering of mourners. But as the last of them departed, leaving her alone with nothing but the howling wind and a mound of fresh turned earth, Lillian wondered if she truly would be. The weeks that followed Thomas's death from pneumonia blurred together in a haze of grief and practicality. The small ranch outside of Silver Creek needed tending, and life waited for no one, not even widows with broken hearts. Each morning Lillian rose before dawn, donned her simplest dress, and set about the tasks that needed doing: feeding chickens, milking the cow, mending fences, all while Thomas's mother's words echoed in her mind. "A widow doesn't seek love again. It's improper. Unseemly." It had been a month since the funeral when Sheriff Parker rode up to her homestead, his expression grave beneath his wide-brimmed hat. "Mrs. O'Brien," he called out, dismounting with a grunt that spoke of too many years in the saddle. "Got some news you ought to hear." Lillian wiped her hands on her apron and stepped off the porch. "What is it, Sheriff?" Banks calling in Thomas's loan. "Seems he borrowed against the property before he passed." The news hit Lillian like a physical blow. "That can't be. Thomas would have told me." The sheriff removed his hat, revealing a balding head slick with sweat despite the cool spring air. "I'm sorry, Mrs. O'Brien. You've got 60 days to make good on the debt or they'll foreclose." Lillian's legs threatened to give way beneath her. "How much?" $500. The sum might as well have been $5,000. Lillian had less than $50 to her name, and the ranch barely produced enough to keep her fed. "Thank you for telling me," she managed, her voice steadier than her heart. After the sheriff departed, Lillian sat on the porch steps and allowed herself 10 minutes of tears, no more, no less. Then she washed her face with cold water from the pump and made a decision. She would go to town tomorrow and find work, any work that might help her save the only home she had left. Silver Creek was a modest but growing town, nestled in a valley that had seen its share of prospectors and dreamers pass through. The main street boasted a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, and various other establishments catering to the needs of ranchers, miners, and travelers. As Lillian tied her horse to the hitching post outside the general store, she straightened her simple blue dress and adjusted her bonnet. Mrs. O'Brien, Martha Wilson, the store owner's wife, greeted her warmly. "How are you faring, dear?" "As well as can be expected," Lillian replied with a practiced smile. "Actually, I'm looking for work. I was wondering if you might need help around the store." Martha's expression shifted to one of pity. "Oh, I wish we could, but business has been slow this spring. Have you tried the hotel?" "I heard Miss Adler might need someone to help with laundry and cleaning." By midday, Lillian had been turned away from the hotel, the dress shop, and even the schoolhouse, where she'd offered to assist the teacher with the younger children. Each rejection was delivered with genuine regret, but left her with dwindling hope. As she walked past the Silver Spur Saloon, the sound of raucous laughter and piano music spilled into the street. Lillian had never set foot inside such an establishment. Proper ladies didn't, but desperation was a powerful motivator. She hesitated at the batwing doors, gathering her courage. "You don't want to go in there, madam," a deep voice spoke from behind her. Lillian turned to find a tall man watching her with eyes the color of a summer sky. He leaned against a post, one boot crossed over the other, his stance casual but alert. Everything about him suggested a man accustomed to the harsh realities of the frontier, from his sun-weathered skin to the well-worn leather of his holster. "I don't believe we've met," Lillian said, lifting her chin slightly. "Name's Adam Reed," he said, straightening and touching the brim of his hat. "Just arrived in town yesterday, and you'd be Mrs. O'Brien, I reckon. How did you know that?" A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Small town. Word travels fast when a pretty widow is asking around for work." Lillian felt heat rise to her cheeks, though whether from embarrassment or indignation, she couldn't say. "My financial situation is not a matter for town gossip, Mr. Reed." "No disrespect intended," he said, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "I only meant to say that if you're looking for honest work, I might have a proposition for you." Suspicion immediately clouded Lillian's face. She'd heard of men who preyed on vulnerable women, offering help with ulterior motives. What sort of proposition? Adam Reed seemed to read her thoughts. "Nothing improper, madam. I've bought the old Donovan place east of town. Planning to turn it into a working cattle ranch, but the house is in dire need of attention. I need someone to cook, clean, and generally make it habitable while I focus on the land and livestock." "And why would you offer such a position to a stranger?" Lillian asked, still wary. "Because Mrs. Wilson at the general store said you're hardworking and honest, and because I need help from someone who knows the area." He named a monthly wage that was generous enough to make Lillian's eyes widen slightly. "It's a business arrangement, Mrs. O'Brien." "Nothing more, nothing less," he added, his expression earnest. "And if it helps you keep your own place, all the better." Lillian studied him, trying to gauge his character. Adam Reed stood a head taller than her, with broad shoulders and capable hands that spoke of a lifetime of hard work. His clothes were simple but well-maintained denim trousers, a chambray shirt, and a leather vest. The gun at his hip looked well used but not worn for show, and his boots were practical rather than flashy. Most telling were his eyes, direct and clear, meeting hers without guile. "I'd need to return to my own ranch each evening," she said finally. "I have animals to tend to." Adam nodded. "Fair enough. I can drive you back and forth in my wagon until we work out something better." Lillian took a deep breath. Every instinct told her to decline, to find another way, but practicality won out. "When would you want me to start?" "Tomorrow morning, if that suits you." "Very well, Mr. Reed, I'll be ready at 7. Adam touched his hat again. "I'll be there at 6:30. The days are getting longer, and there's much to be done. As Lillian rode home, her thoughts were a jumble of uncertainty and cautious hope. She'd accepted work from a man she'd just met, a stranger to Silver Creek, and while her instincts told her he was trustworthy, experience had taught her that appearances could be deceiving. Still, the wage he'd offered would go a long way toward saving her ranch if she was frugal with every penny. That evening, as she tended to her modest flock of chickens, Lillian found herself wondering about Adam Reed. What had brought him to Silver Creek? Why was a man who looked to be in his early 30s not yet married? And why did the thought of spending her days in his employ make her heart beat just a little faster? "Stop it," she scolded herself aloud. "He's your employer, nothing more, and you're a widow who should know better." True to his word, Adam arrived at precisely 6:30 the next morning. The sun was just beginning to cast golden light across the prairie as his wagon rumbled up the rutted path to her homestead. Lillian was waiting on the porch, dressed in a practical brown skirt and white blouse, her auburn hair secured in a simple bun beneath a wide-brimmed straw hat. "Morning, Mrs. O'Brien," he called, pulling the team of horses to a stop. "Ready to tackle the dust and cobwebs of Donovan Place?" "Good morning, Mr. Reed," she replied, picking up a small basket containing her lunch and a spare apron. "I believe I am." As Adam helped her onto the wagon seat, his hand firm but gentle under her elbow, Lillian noticed calluses that spoke of years of roping and riding. He smelled of leather, coffee, and the faint hint of shaving soap clean, masculine scents that triggered an unexpected flutter in her stomach. "I appreciate you agreeing to help," Adam said as they set off down the road. "Most women wouldn't take on extra work when they've got a place of their own to manage." "Most women aren't facing foreclosure," Lillian said, then immediately regretted her candor. "Forgive me." "That was more information than you needed." Adam glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "No need for forgiveness, Mrs. O'Brien. We all face our struggles out here. The West doesn't discriminate between men and women when it comes to hardship." The ride to the Donovan place took nearly 40 minutes, during which Lillian learned that Adam had come from Colorado, where he'd worked as a ranch foreman for 8 years. Before that, he'd been a cavalry scout during the war, though he didn't elaborate on his experiences. He'd saved his wages carefully, supplementing them with occasional work breaking horses, until he had enough to buy his own spread. "Why Silver Creek?" Lillian asked as they crested a hill that revealed the Donovan homestead in the distance, a 2-story farmhouse with a sagging porch and weathered barn behind it. "Good water, decent grazing land, and far enough from my past," Adam replied cryptically. Then, as if regretting his words, he added more lightly, "And the price was right. Old man Donovan's son was eager to sell after his father passed." Lillian understood the desire to leave the past behind. Wasn't that part of what had brought her and Thomas to Montana from Philadelphia 3 years ago? A chance to start fresh, away from the constraints and judgments of society back east. As they drew closer to the homestead, Lillian could see why Adam had hired help. The house, while solidly built, had clearly stood empty for at least a year. Windows were grimy, the porch steps needed repair, and she could only imagine the state of the interior. "It's not much to look at now," Adam admitted as he helped her down from the wagon, "but it's got good bones. Just needs a woman's touch." The phrase hung in the air between them, oddly intimate. Lillian busied herself with straightening her skirt to hide her discomfort. "Well, let's see what we're dealing with," she said briskly, heading toward the house. The inside was worse than she'd anticipated. Dust covered every surface, mouse droppings littered the floors, and cobwebs festooned the corners of each room. The kitchen stove was rusted, the pantry shelves were bare save for a few ancient cans with unreadable labels, and the pump at the sink needed priming before it would yield even a trickle of water. "I'll understand if you change your mind," Adam said, watching her survey the chaos with dismay. Lillian squared her shoulders. "I've never been one to shy away from hard work, Mr. Reed, but I'll need supplies: soap, lye, brushes, rags, beeswax for the furniture, and that stove needs to be replaced if you expect meals to be cooked here." Adam's smile was slow and genuine. "Make a list. We'll go to town tomorrow for whatever you need." They spent that first day clearing out the worst of the debris. Adam focused on the heavy lifting, dragging out a mildewed mattress, removing a raccoon's nest from the chimney, and repairing the back door that hung crookedly on its hinges. Lillian swept, scrubbed, and organized, starting with the kitchen as the heart of any home. By late afternoon, her arms ached and her dress was filthy despite the apron. But the kitchen was beginning to look habitable. The floors had been swept and mopped, the windows washed to allow in streams of sunlight, and the cupboards cleared of their unwanted residents. "You've accomplished more in one day than I could have in a week," Adam said, leaning against the doorframe and observing her work with obvious appreciation. Lillian pushed a stray lock of hair from her forehead, leaving a smudge of dirt in its wake. "It's only a beginning. Tomorrow we'll need to focus on the bedrooms so you have somewhere decent to sleep." Adam raised an eyebrow. "I hired you to make this place livable, not to do it while I stand around watching. In my experience, Mr. Reed, most men prefer not to involve themselves in household matters." "Then you've known the wrong sort of men, Mrs. O'Brien," he replied, his gaze holding hers for a moment longer than was comfortable. Out here, a man who can't cook his own meals or wash his own clothes doesn't survive long. The drive back to Lillian's homestead was quieter than the morning journey, both of them tired from the day's labor. As they approached her small ranch, the setting sun painted the modest cabin in hues of gold and amber, giving it a warmth that belied its precarious future. "Thank you for the work today," Lillian said as Adam helped her down from the wagon. "I'll be ready at the same time tomorrow. I'll bring coffee and biscuits," he promised. "No sense in you cooking breakfast twice." It was a small gesture, but one that touched Lillian unexpectedly. Thomas had been a good man, but consideration had never been his strongest trait. "That's very kind, Mr. Reed." "Adam," he said, "if we're going to be working together, you might as well use my given name." Lillian hesitated, aware of crossing an invisible line of propriety. "Very well, Adam." "Then you must call me Lillian." "Lillian," he repeated, as if testing the feel of her name. "Until tomorrow, then." As she watched him drive away, Lillian felt an odd mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The work was hard, but it felt good to be doing something productive, something that might save her home. And if she was honest with herself, there was something about Adam Reed that intrigued her, a quiet strength, an unexpected gentleness that contrasted with his weathered exterior. "Stop it," she told herself firmly as she went to tend her animals. "He's your employer, and you're a widow who should know better than to notice such things." But that night, as she soaked her sore muscles in a bath of heated water, Lillian found her thoughts drifting to Adam's smile, and the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he laughed at something she'd said. It had been so long since she'd felt this way, this awareness of a man as more than just a figure passing through her day. "It's only because he's new to town," she rationalized, scrubbing her skin with more vigor than necessary. "A novelty, nothing more." The following morning dawned clear and crisp, with a hint of approaching summer in the air. True to his word, Adam arrived with a pot of coffee and a cloth-covered basket of fresh biscuits still warm from some baker's oven. "I can't take credit for these," he admitted as they ate at her small kitchen table. "Mrs. Wilson at the general store was just taking them out of her oven when I stopped for supplies." "They're delicious," Lillian said, savoring the buttery taste. It had been months since she'd indulged in such a simple pleasure, carefully rationing her own supplies to make them last. After breakfast, they stopped in town for the cleaning supplies Lillian had listed. At the general store, Martha Wilson greeted them with undisguised curiosity. "Mrs. O'Brien, Mr. Reed," she said, her eyes moving between them. "What a surprise to see you together." "Mr. Reed has hired me to help restore the Donovan place," Lillian explained quickly, aware of how their arrival together might appear to gossiping tongues. "A wise decision," Martha said, her gaze lingering on Adam. "Our Lillian is the most capable woman in Silver Creek, despite her youth." "I'm discovering that," Adam replied with a smile that made Lillian suddenly busy examining a display of brushes. As Adam settled the bill for their supplies, Martha leaned close to Lillian. "He seems like a fine man," she whispered, "and not hard on the eyes either." "It's not like that," Lillian protested softly. "It's only work." Martha patted her hand. "Of course, dear, but remember you're young yet. Thomas would want you to be happy." Before Lillian could formulate a response, Adam returned with their parcels. "Ready to continue our battle against the dust, Lillian?" The use of her first name did not escape Martha's notice, judging by her raised eyebrows. Lillian felt her cheeks warm as she nodded and followed Adam outside. "Mrs. Wilson seems to have taken a liking to you," Lillian observed as they loaded their purchases into the wagon. Adam chuckled. "She offered me apple pie and introductions to her niece in the same breath yesterday. I think she fancies herself a matchmaker." "You didn't mention you'd met her before," Lillian said, trying to ignore the odd twist of disappointment in her stomach at the mention of Martha's niece. "Didn't seem important," Adam replied, helping her onto the wagon seat. "Besides, I told her I wasn't in the market for a wife, just supplies and information." The words shouldn't have relieved Lillian, but they did. Not that it mattered to her whether Adam Reed was seeking a bride or not. She was a widow focused on saving her home, not a young girl with romantic notions. Over the next 2 weeks, they fell into a comfortable routine. Each morning, Adam would arrive at Lillian's homestead, often with coffee and some small treat for breakfast. They would work side by side at the Donovan place, now increasingly referred to as Reed Ranch, until late afternoon when he would drive her home. The house transformed under their combined efforts. Floors were scrubbed until the wood gleamed, windows shone in the sunlight, and furniture was either repaired or replaced. Adam proved as good as his word about sharing the household tasks, never balking at helping with what some might consider women's work. "My mother would approve," he said one afternoon as they hung freshly washed curtains in the front parlor. "She always said a man should know how to fend for himself in all matters, not just those involving horses and guns." "She sounds like a wise woman," Lillian replied, standing on a chair to reach the curtain rod. "Is she still living?" A shadow crossed Adam's face. "No, influenza took both my parents the winter after I returned from the war. That's when I headed west for good." Lillian understood loss all too well. "I'm sorry. My own parents died in a ferry accident when I was 18. It's why I agreed to marry Thomas so quickly afterward. He offered stability when everything else felt uncertain." Adam's gaze was sympathetic but not pitying. Was it a good marriage? The question was direct, perhaps too personal, but Lillian found herself answering honestly. "It was. Comfortable. Thomas was kind, if not particularly passionate. We were more companions than lovers toward the end." She blushed at her own candor. "Forgive me, that was inappropriate." "There's nothing to forgive," Adam said quietly. "Life's too short and too hard out here to waste time pretending. Thomas was fortunate to have you, whether he fully appreciated that or not." Something in his tone made Lillian look at him more closely. Adam stood below her, holding the chair steady, his face upturned to hers with an expression that made her heart skip. For a breathless moment, she thought he might reach for her, and more surprising still, she realized she wouldn't have stopped him. The moment broke when a clatter of hooves outside announced the arrival of the new stove Adam had ordered from Denver. He stepped back, clearing his throat. "That'll be Jackson with our delivery. I'll go help him unload." Lillian remained on the chair for a moment after he left, willing her pulse to slow. What was happening to her? She had no business feeling this way about a man she barely knew, especially when she was still technically in mourning for her husband. Yet as the days passed, she found herself increasingly aware of Adam, the strength in his hands as he worked, the rich timbre of his laugh, the intensity of his gaze when he thought she wasn't looking. They talked as they worked, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes for the future, their observations about life in Silver Creek. He was well read for a cowboy, quoting Shakespeare on occasion and discussing politics with an informed perspective that surprised her. "People tend to underestimate men who work with their hands," he said when she commented on it. "My father believed education wasn't just for those who could afford fancy schools. He taught me to read from the Bible, Shakespeare, and whatever newspapers came our way." By the end of the 3rd week, the house was transformed into a home modest but welcoming, with polished floors, gleaming windows, and curtains that billowed in the spring breeze. The kitchen boasted a new stove and well-stocked pantry, and Adam had even splurged on a set of blue willow dishes that reminded Lillian of ones her mother had treasured. "It's time we celebrated our accomplishment," Adam announced one Friday evening as he prepared to drive Lillian home. "Would you join me for supper in town tomorrow night? The hotel dining room is supposed to be quite good." Lillian hesitated, acutely aware that such an invitation crossed the line from employer and employee to something more personal. "I don't know if that would be appropriate, Adam." "People might talk. Let them," he said with a shrug. "We're two adults sharing a meal, nothing more, unless—" He paused, studying her face. "Unless you'd prefer there to be something more." The directness of the question took Lillian's breath away. I'm "I'm still in mourning," she said, the words sounding hollow even to her own ears. Adam's expression softened. "Mourning is for the heart, Lillian, not for appearances. If your heart has healed enough to consider new possibilities, that's between you and your conscience, not you and the town gossips." His words resonated with something deep inside her. Had her heart healed? Thomas had been gone for nearly 4 months now, and while she still thought of him with fondness, the sharp pain of loss had dulled to a gentle ache. Was it disloyal to admit that her marriage, while comfortable, had lacked the kind of passion she sometimes glimpsed in Adam's eyes when he looked at her? "Just dinner," she found herself saying. As friends and colleagues celebrating a job well done. Adam's smile was warm. "I'll pick you up at 6 tomorrow, then." That night, Lillian stood before the small mirror in her bedroom, examining her reflection with critical eyes. Her mourning clothes, the black dresses she'd worn since Thomas's death, hung in the wardrobe, but tonight she reached past them to a dress she hadn't worn in years. Made of deep blue cotton with a simple lace collar, it brought out the color of her eyes and complemented her auburn hair. "It's only dinner," she told her reflection, even as she pinned her hair more carefully than usual and dabbed a precious drop of rose water behind each ear. When Adam arrived the next evening, his appreciative gaze told her the effort hadn't been wasted. He, too, had dressed for the occasion in clean black trousers, a crisp white shirt, and a vest that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. "You look beautiful," he said simply, offering his arm to escort her to the waiting buggy, not the work wagon they usually used, but a smaller, more elegant vehicle obviously borrowed for the occasion. The hotel dining room was bustling with Saturday night patrons when they arrived. Heads turned as Adam led Lillian to a table by the window, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back. She recognized the curious glances, the whispered comments behind napkins, but found that Adam's presence beside her made them matter less than she'd expected. "Everyone is staring," she murmured as he held her chair. "Let them," he replied quietly. "They'll find something else to talk about by next week." The meal was the finest Lillian had eaten since leaving Philadelphia. Tender beefsteak, roasted potatoes with rosemary, fresh green beans, and apple pie with cream for dessert. Adam kept the conversation light, telling her amusing stories about his early days as a ranch hand and asking about her life before coming west. "What made you leave Philadelphia?" he asked as they lingered over coffee. "It's a long way from civilization to Montana territory." Lillian traced the rim of her cup with one finger. "Thomas had tuberculosis. The doctors recommended the mountain air, and I think he wanted to accomplish something of his own, away from his family's influence and expectations." "And what about you? What did you want?" The question caught her off guard. Few people had ever asked what she wanted. It had always been assumed that a woman's desires aligned with her husband's. "I wanted adventure," she admitted after a moment. "A chance to see beyond the narrow confines of society drawing rooms. And I got it, though not quite in the way I'd imagined." Adam's eyes held hers across the table. "Do you regret it? Coming west?" "No," she said without hesitation. "It's been hard, especially since Thomas died, but there's a freedom here that I never knew in the East. A chance to define yourself by your actions rather than your family name or social connections." "That's what drew me west, too," Adam said, his expression thoughtful. "That and the open sky. Sometimes back east I felt like I couldn't breathe with all those buildings crowding out the horizon." As they spoke, Lillian became aware of a commotion at the front of the dining room. A group of cowboys had entered, obviously already deep in their cups despite the early hour. Their loud laughter and coarse language drew disapproving glances from the other diners. "Trouble?" Adam murmured, his posture subtly shifting to alertness. "Maybe we should go." Before they could rise, one of the cowboys staggered toward their table, his bleary gaze fixing on Lillian with an insolent appraisal that made her skin crawl. "Well, ain't you a pretty thing?" he slurred, bracing himself against their table. "What's a fine-looking woman like you doing with this saddle tramp when you could have some real company?" Adam's voice was deadly quiet. "Move along, friend, the lady's not interested," the cowboy sneered. "Lady. That's Thomas O'Brien's widow, ain't it? Didn't take her long to find herself a new man to warm her bed." Lillian gasped at the crude implication, her cheeks burning with humiliation. Before she could respond, Adam was on his feet, his movement so swift she barely registered it until he had the drunken cowboy by the collar. "Apologize to the lady," Adam said, his voice controlled but with an edge of steel that made the dining room fall silent. The cowboy, suddenly aware that he'd miscalculated, raised his hands in surrender. "No offense meant," he muttered, "just funning a bit." "The apology," Adam insisted, not releasing his grip. "Sorry, madam," the cowboy said, his eyes darting between Adam's face and the door where his companions waited uncertainly. "Spoke out of turn, won't happen again." Adam released him with a slight push toward the exit. "See that it doesn't." As the cowboys departed, muttering among themselves, Adam returned to the table where Lillian sat rigid with embarrassment. "I'm sorry about that," he said gently. "Some men don't know how to behave in the presence of a lady." "It's not your fault," Lillian said, though her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her coffee cup. "But perhaps this outing was a mistake after all. People will talk even more now." Adam covered her hand with his own, his touch warm and reassuring. "Lillian, look at me." She raised her eyes to meet his, finding them filled with a mixture of concern and something deeper that made her breath catch. "What happened to Thomas was tragic, but it doesn't mean your life is over. You're young, beautiful, and have every right to find happiness again. Anyone who says differently isn't worth your consideration." His words echoed strangely in her mind, reminding her of something she couldn't quite place. Then it came to her the cemetery, the day of Thomas's funeral, when her mother-in-law had insisted she should never seek love again. "My mother-in-law would disagree," Lillian said softly. "She believes a proper widow honors her husband's memory by remaining alone." Adam's fingers tightened slightly around hers. "And what do you believe, Lillian?" The question hung between them, laden with meaning that went beyond the immediate context. What did she believe? That love was a once-in-a-lifetime occurrence, that her heart should remain forever shuttered because fate had taken Thomas too soon. "I believe," she said slowly, "that life is too precious and too uncertain to waste in needless sorrow. Thomas wouldn't want me to be alone forever." Something like hope kindled in Adam's eyes. "No, he wouldn't. A man who truly loves a woman wants her happiness above all else, even if he's not there to provide it." They finished their meal in a companionable silence that felt more intimate than any conversation. When Adam helped Lillian into the buggy afterward, his hand lingered on hers a moment longer than necessary, and she found she didn't mind. The drive back to her homestead was peaceful, with stars emerging one by one in the darkening sky. Adam pointed out constellations, telling her the names his Cheyenne friend had taught him that differed from the classical Greek ones she knew. "The Big Dipper is the Great Bear to us, but to them, it's the Seven Brothers," he explained, his voice a gentle rumble in the darkness. "And the Milky Way is the Spirit Road, where souls travel after death." "That's beautiful," Lillian said, gazing up at the swath of stars overhead. "I never thought of the stars having different stories depending on who's looking at them." "Most things in life look different depending on your perspective," Adam replied, his eyes leaving the stars to settle on her profile. When they arrived at her homestead, Adam insisted on walking her to the door, a lantern in hand to light their way. On the porch, Lillian turned to thank him for the evening, only to find him standing closer than she'd expected, his face partly in shadow, partly illuminated by the golden lantern light. "I had a wonderful time," she said, suddenly aware of the rapid beating of her heart. "Thank you for suggesting it." "Thank you for accepting," Adam replied, his voice lower than usual. "Lillian." He set the lantern down on the porch railing, its light casting long shadows across the weathered boards. Then, moving slowly enough that she could have stepped away if she wished, he raised his hand to her face, his fingers gentle as they traced the curve of her cheek. "I know it's too soon," he said softly. "I know you're still healing. But I want you to know that when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be here." The tenderness in his touch, the sincerity in his voice, broke something open inside Lillian, a dam holding back emotions she'd scarcely acknowledged even to herself. Tears welled in her eyes, not of sorrow but of a strange, bittersweet relief. "Adam," she whispered, her own hand rising to cover his where it rested against her cheek. "I don't know what I'm feeling. It's all so confused." "There's no rush," he assured her, his thumb gently brushing away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "Time sorts out most confusions if we let it." For a breathless moment, Lillian thought he might kiss her, and more surprising still, she realized she wanted him to. Instead, he stepped back, picking up the lantern once more. "Good night, Lillian," he said softly. "I'll see you on Monday morning." She watched him walk back to the buggy, his tall figure gradually disappearing into the darkness beyond the lantern's glow. Only when the sound of hoofbeats had faded completely did she enter her small cabin, her mind a whirl of conflicting emotions. That night, lying in the bed she had shared with Thomas, Lillian allowed herself to fully examine her feelings for Adam Reed. There was attraction. Certainly he was a handsome man with a quiet strength that appealed to her, but it was more than physical. She admired his intelligence, his work ethic, his kindness toward her and others. In the weeks they'd worked together, she'd come to value his company, to look forward to their conversations, to feel more alive in his presence than she had in months. Was that betrayal of Thomas's memory? Or was it simply the natural healing of a heart that had been broken but not destroyed? As she drifted towards sleep, Lillian remembered something her grandmother had told her after her first heartbreak as a girl of 16. "The heart is not like a vase, child, that once broken can never be whole again. It's more like a garden with proper care and time. New growth can flourish where once there was only barren earth." Perhaps her heart was ready for new growth after all. The following morning, Lillian attended church services as usual, though her mind wandered during Reverend Miller's sermon on patience and fortitude. She found herself scanning the congregation for Adam, but he wasn't present. Not that she should have expected him to be. Many of the ranchers and cowboys in the area viewed Sunday as their only opportunity to catch up on rest or personal tasks. As she was leaving the church, Martha Wilson intercepted her with a knowing smile. "You and Mr. Reed caused quite a stir at the hotel last night," she said without preamble. "Mrs. Henderson at the next table said he defended your honor most gallantly against that drunken cowpoke." Lillian sighed, resigning herself to being the subject of town gossip. Mr. Reed was simply being a gentleman. "Hum," Martha hummed, clearly unconvinced. "A gentleman who couldn't take his eyes off you, according to Mrs. Henderson. Not that I blame him. You look lovely in that blue dress, dear. Much more becoming than those dreary blacks." Before Lillian could formulate a response, Martha patted her arm conspiratorially. "Don't you mind what the old biddies say? My Harold was my second husband, you know. My first died of the typhoid when I was 22, and I married Harold just 6 months later. Sometimes the heart knows what it needs, regardless of what society dictates." With that surprising revelation, Martha moved on to greet the Reverend, leaving Lillian to ponder her words. It was comforting to know that someone in town would support her if she did pursue a relationship with Adam, though the very thought made her cheeks warm with a mixture of embarrassment and anticipation. The remainder of Sunday passed quietly as Lillian caught up on her own household tasks. She found herself anticipating Monday morning with an eagerness that had nothing to do with the work awaiting her at Reed Ranch, and everything to do with seeing Adam again. When he arrived at the usual time the next day, Lillian was ready, wearing a light green dress that she'd altered from one of her pre-morning garments. Adam's appreciative glance as she climbed into the wagon beside him made the effort worthwhile. "You look particularly lovely today," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled. That color suits you. Thank you, Lillian replied, smoothing her skirt to hide her pleasure at the compliment. I thought it was time for a change. The drive to the ranch was filled with easy conversation. As if by unspoken agreement, they had decided not to acknowledge the charged moment on her porch Saturday night. Yet Lillian was acutely aware of Adam's presence beside her, the brush of his arm against hers as he guided the horses, the clean scent of soap and leather that surrounded him, the deep timbre of his voice as he described his plans for the day. When they arrived at the ranch, Lillian was surprised to see a wagon loaded with lumber parked near the barn. "Are you building something?" she asked as Adam helped her down. "A surprise," he said, a hint of excitement in his eyes. "But it'll have to wait until later. First, I need to check on the new calves that arrived yesterday." While Adam tended to his growing herd, Lillian busied herself in the kitchen, preparing a hearty stew for their midday meal and baking bread in the new stove. The domestic routine felt comfortable now, the kitchen as familiar to her as her own. She hummed as she worked, a lightness in her spirit that had been absent for too long. When Adam returned for dinner, he brought with him the fragrance of sunshine and grass, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms tanned and muscled from outdoor work. They ate at the kitchen table, discussing the progress of the ranch and plans for the coming summer. "I'm thinking of planting a vegetable garden behind the house," Lillian said as she served Adam a second helping of stew. "The soil looks rich and it would save you money on provisions." "Our house could use a garden," Adam agreed, then paused as if realizing what he'd said. "I mean the house." "The ranch house." The slip sent a flutter through Lillian's stomach. Our house. Such a simple phrase, yet laden with implications that both thrilled and frightened her. After the meal, Adam insisted that Lillian join him outside. "I want to show you something," he said, a boyish eagerness in his expression that she found endearing. He led her to the lumber-laden wagon she'd noticed earlier. "I've been thinking," he began, suddenly seeming nervous. "The drive between your place and here takes too much time out of our day. And with summer coming, you'll want to tend your own garden and animals without rushing back and forth." Lillian nodded, puzzled by his apparent anxiety. "Yes, it is becoming somewhat impractical." "So I had an idea," Adam continued, gesturing to the lumber. "What if I built you a small cabin here on the ranch? Nothing fancy, just a comfortable place where you could stay during the week if you wanted to. We could ride over to your place in the evenings to tend your animals, and you'd still have your independence, but without the long commute each day." Lillian stared at him, taken aback by the offer. "You'd build me a cabin, that's too generous, Adam." "It's practical," he insisted, though his eyes told her it was more than that. "And it would benefit us both. You'd have more time for your own affairs, and I'd have your help here for longer hours." The proposal made practical sense, yet Lillian couldn't help but see beyond the stated reasons to the unspoken ones. A cabin on his property meant a deeper connection, a more permanent arrangement than their current employer-employee relationship. "What would people say?" she asked, voicing her primary concern. "A widow living on a bachelor's property, even in a separate dwelling." Adam's expression grew serious. "Lillian, at some point you have to decide whose opinion matters more, the town gossips or your own. I respect you, and I would never do anything to compromise your reputation. But I also believe we're both adults capable of making our own decisions without the approval of every busybody in Silver Creek." His directness was refreshing, and Lillian found herself nodding slowly. "You're right, and the practical benefits are undeniable." She glanced at the lumber, then back at Adam's hopeful face. "Where were you thinking of building it?" The smile that broke across his features was worth any amount of gossip. "Come, I'll show you." He led her to a spot about 100 yards from the main house, on a gentle rise that offered a view of both the house and the distant mountains. A large cottonwood tree provided natural shade, and a small stream gurgled nearby, promising the soothing sound of running water. "It's perfect," Lillian said softly, envisioning a simple cabin nestled in this peaceful setting. But it would take weeks to build, even with help. I've already spoken to some of the men in town who do carpentry work in the off-season, Adam replied. With their help, we could have the basic structure up in a week or so. Finishing the interior would take longer, but you could at least have a roof over your head and privacy while we complete it. The thought and planning he'd already invested touched Lillian deeply. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment suggestion, but something he'd been considering for some time. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "for thinking of me, for caring enough to do this." Adam's eyes held hers, serious and intent. "I care more than I should, given the circumstances, but I can't help it, Lillian. From the moment I saw you standing outside that saloon, looking so determined despite your obvious discomfort, I knew you were someone special." His candor left her breathless. No man had ever spoken to her with such honesty about his feelings, not even Thomas during their courtship. It was both terrifying and exhilarating. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "You don't have to say anything," Adam assured her, taking her hand gently in his. "Just think about the cabin. If you decide it's not what you want, we'll find another solution." The touch of his hand, warm and strong around hers, sent a current of awareness through Lillian that she couldn't ignore. She was falling for this man, this quiet, thoughtful cowboy who saw her not as a helpless widow but as a woman of strength and value. "I think it's exactly what I want," she said softly, squeezing his hand. "When do we start building?" The following weeks passed in a flurry of activity. True to his word, Adam assembled a team of workers who began construction of the cabin immediately. Lillian divided her time between overseeing the main house, helping with the cabin when she could, and making trips back to her homestead to tend her animals and garden. As May turned to June, the Montana landscape erupted in wildflowers and verdant grass. The ranch flourished under Adam's careful management, with new cattle arriving weekly and plans for horse breeding in the works. The main house, once neglected and dreary, now gleamed with fresh paint and polish, curtains billowing in the summer breeze and Lillian's touch evident in every room. The cabin, too, took shape rapidly, a simple one-room structure with a sleeping loft above, a small kitchen area, and a stone fireplace for warmth during the cold Montana winters. Adam insisted on quality materials and careful craftsmanship, checking each detail personally. "It needs to withstand the winter storms," he explained when Lillian questioned the expense of proper insulation. "Montana winters are no joke." By mid-June, the cabin was habitable enough for Lillian to spend her first night there. Adam had surprised her with a new bed frame, crafted by the town's furniture maker, and a colorful quilt that Martha Wilson had contributed when she heard of the project. "It's not much," Adam said as he showed Lillian the finished interior, "but it's solid and warm, and the door has a good lock." Lillian smiled at his emphasis on the lock, understanding his concern for both her safety and her reputation. "It's perfect, Adam. I don't know how to thank you." "Your happiness is thanks enough," he replied, his gaze warm as it rested on her face. "And knowing you're close by, safe and comfortable." That evening, after Adam had returned to the main house with a gentlemanly tip of his hat, Lillian sat on the small porch of her new cabin, watching the sunset paint the western sky in hues of gold and crimson. The ranch spread before her, cattle grazing in the distance, the weathered barn now standing straight and strong after repairs, the main house with lamp light glowing in the windows. It felt like home in a way her small homestead never had, and the realization brought both joy and a touch of guilt. Thomas had worked hard on that homestead, had poured his dwindling strength into making it a viable ranch. Yet it had always felt temporary somehow, as if both of them knew their time there would be brief. Here on Adam's land, Lillian could envision a future stretching out before her, seasons changing, crops growing, children running through the tall grass. The thought startled her with its clarity and longing. Children. Adam's children with his blue eyes and quiet strength. "You're getting ahead of yourself," she murmured, even as her heart raced at the vision. Adam had made no declarations beyond admitting he cared for her, had asked for nothing more than her presence on the ranch as his employee and friend. The stolen glances, the lingering touches, the conversations that lasted late into the evening, these might mean everything or nothing. Yet as June turned to July, bringing with it scorching days and the sweet scent of hay being cut in neighboring fields, Lillian found herself falling deeper into a love she had neither sought nor expected. Adam was unlike any man she had known, strong without being domineering, kind without being soft, intelligent without being condescending. He valued her opinions, sought her advice on matters ranging from household management to cattle breeding, and treated her with a respect that made her feel more like a partner than an employee. Their days settled into a comfortable routine. Mornings were spent on separate tasks, Adam with his ranch hands tending to the growing herd, Lillian managing the household and the vegetable garden that now flourished behind the main house. They would meet for the midday meal, sharing news and plans, then work side by side on whatever project needed attention in the afternoon. Evenings were Lillian's favorite time. After supper, they often sat on the main house's porch, watching the sunset and talking of everything and nothing, books they had read, places they had seen, dreams they had harbored. Sometimes Adam would read aloud from a volume of poetry or a newspaper from back east, his deep voice giving weight to the words. Other times, Lillian would share stories from her childhood in Philadelphia, making him laugh with tales of her misadventures as a headstrong girl in a society that valued demure compliance. It was during one such evening in late July that their relationship shifted irrevocably. The day had been particularly hot, the kind of relentless heat that seemed to press down from the sky and radiate up from the earth simultaneously. Lillian had spent hours canning vegetables from the garden, the kitchen like an oven despite every window being thrown open to catch any hint of breeze. By evening she was exhausted, her hair escaping its pins in damp tendrils, her lightweight cotton dress clinging to her skin. Still, she had prepared supper as usual: cold sliced ham, potato salad, and fresh bread before retreating to her cabin for a quick wash in cool water from the well. When she arrived at the main house for the evening meal, she found Adam freshly bathed as well, his hair still damp at the temples, wearing a clean shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned forearms. The sight of him, somehow managing to look collected despite the heat, brought a smile to her lips. "You look remarkably unaffected by this infernal weather," she commented as they sat down to eat on the screened back porch, where at least the setting sun didn't add its glare to their discomfort. Adam chuckled, passing her a plate of ham. "Years on the trail teach a man to endure all sorts of conditions. Besides, Colorado summers can be just as brutal." They ate in companionable silence for a time, too hot for unnecessary conversation. As twilight deepened, bringing with it a blessed cooling of the air, Adam suggested they take a walk down to the creek that bordered the eastern edge of the property. "The water's shallow this time of year, but it's always cooler by the creek," he said, offering his arm as they set off across the yard. The night was coming alive around them, crickets chirping, frogs croaking from the direction of the water, fireflies beginning their ethereal dance among the tall grasses. Overhead, stars emerged one by one in a sky still tinged with the last lavender light of day. The creek was indeed cooler, a gentle breeze flowing along its course like a natural corridor of relief from the day's heat. Lillian sighed contentedly as they sat on a fallen log beside the water, slipping off her shoes to dangle her feet in the cool current. "Better?" Adam asked, his voice low in the gathering darkness. "Much," she replied, leaning back on her hands and tilting her face to catch the breeze. "I never thought I'd miss Philadelphia's humidity, but at least there you could expect afternoon thunderstorms to break the heat." "We get those here too, though not often enough in July," Adam said, his gaze on the rippling water. "August brings more rain, usually." They sat in silence for a time, listening to the night sounds and watching the moonlight create silver patterns on the surface of the creek. Lillian was acutely aware of Adam beside her, not touching, but close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could catch the clean scent of soap and the underlying musk that was uniquely his. "Lillian," he said finally, his voice so quiet she had to lean closer to hear him. "There's something I need to tell you." The serious note in his tone made her heart quicken with apprehension. "What is it?" Adam turned to face her, his expression grave in the moonlight. "I received a letter today from the bank in Silver Creek. They're calling in your loan early next week instead of the 60 days they originally promised." Lillian felt as if all the air had been pushed from her lungs. "But why? I've been making payments with the wages you've paid me. I've been so careful." "It's not about your payments," Adam said, taking her hand in his. "The bank president is in financial trouble himself. He's calling in loans early to cover his own debts, from what I understand." The news was devastating. Despite her careful saving, Lillian had nowhere near the full amount needed to satisfy the loan. "I'll lose the homestead," she whispered, the reality sinking in like a stone in her chest. "Not necessarily," Adam replied, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. "I have a proposition for you." Lillian looked up at him, hope and wariness mingling in her gaze. "What kind of proposition?" Adam took a deep breath as if gathering his courage. "Marry me, Lillian." Of all the things she might have expected him to say, this was the last. "What?" "Marry me," he repeated, his voice steadier now. "I love you. I think I've loved you since that first day in town when you stood outside the saloon, too proud to ask for help but too determined to give up. You're the strongest, most beautiful woman I've ever known, and I want to spend my life with you." Lillian stared at him, her mind whirling with confusion and a wild, unexpected joy. "But the homestead. As your husband, I could pay off the loan," Adam explained. "The homestead would be ours, along with this ranch. We could build something together, Lillian, a life, a family, a legacy." The offer was so perfect, so tempting that Lillian felt tears well in her eyes. "Adam, I don't want you to marry me out of pity or because you feel responsible for me." In the silvery moonlight, his expression was both tender and fierce. "Pity? Lillian, do you really not know how I feel about you, how my heart races when you enter a room? How I lie awake at night thinking of your smile, your laugh, the way your eyes light up when you're excited about something." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm that sent shivers up her arm. "I'm asking you to marry me because I love you, because I can't imagine my life without you in it. The timing with the bank is unfortunate, but it doesn't change how I feel." Lillian's heart felt too full, too overwhelmed with emotion to form coherent thoughts. "But it's so soon," she whispered. "Thomas has been gone less than 6 months. What will people say?" "They'll say what they always say, whatever serves their own need for entertainment," Adam replied, a note of impatience entering his voice. "Lillian, at some point you have to live for yourself, not for the approval of others. Thomas is gone, God rest his soul, but you're still here, still young, still capable of so much love and joy. Why deny yourself happiness because some calendar says you should mourn longer?" His words struck a chord deep within her. Wasn't that what she'd been doing? Denying her feelings for Adam, denying herself the chance at a new beginning, all because convention dictated a year of mourning. "I do love you," she admitted, the words like a dam breaking, releasing emotions she'd held back for weeks. "I love your strength, your kindness, the way you see me, really see me not as a helpless widow but as a woman with value and purpose." Adam's breath caught audibly. "Then marry me," he said, his hands coming up to frame her face. "Be my wife, my partner, the mother of my children. Let me love you as you deserve to be loved." In the moonlight, with the creek murmuring beside them and the night creatures singing their approval, Lillian made her decision. "Yes," she whispered, her heart soaring with a joy she had thought never to feel again. "Yes, I'll marry you." The kiss that followed was tender at first, a gentle press of lips that spoke of reverence and promise. Then, as if a spark had ignited between them, it deepened into something more urgent, more passionate. Adam's arms encircled her, drawing her against the solid warmth of his chest, while Lillian's hands found their way to his shoulders, then his neck, then into the thick hair at the nape of his neck. When they finally parted, both breathless and a little dazed, Adam rested his forehead against hers. "We should go back to the house," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Before I forget, I'm supposed to be a gentleman." Lillian laughed softly, feeling younger and more carefree than she had in years. "Yes, I suppose we should." As they walked back hand in hand, the ranch spread out before them in the moonlight. Lillian felt a sense of rightness, of coming home in a way that transcended physical location. This land, this man, this life they would build together, it was what she had been searching for without knowing it. The next morning, Adam rode into town to speak with the bank president and make arrangements for paying off Lillian's loan. He returned mid-afternoon with news that made her gasp with surprise. "I spoke with Reverend Miller," he said as they sat on the porch of the main house, a pitcher of lemonade between them. "He's agreed to marry us this Sunday after services." "This Sunday?" Lillian echoed, her eyes wide. "But that's only 3 days away." Adam took her hand, his expression earnest. "I know it's sudden, but the bank wants payment by Monday, and as your husband, I can legally handle the transaction. Besides," he added with a smile that made her heart skip, "now that you've agreed to be my wife, I find I'm not a patient man after all." Despite her initial shock, Lillian found herself nodding. "All right, Sunday it is, but what will I wear? I don't have a proper dress for a wedding, even a simple one." "Martha Wilson mentioned she has some fabric you might like," Adam said, looking pleased with himself. "I may have mentioned our plans to her while I was in town." Lillian laughed, shaking her head in wonder. "You've thought of everything, haven't you?" "I've tried," he admitted. "I want this to be special for you, even if it is happening quickly." The following days passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Lillian rode into town with Adam to select fabric, a lovely cream-colored silk that Martha had been saving for a special occasion, and spent hours sewing a simple but elegant dress with Martha's help. Word of the impending wedding spread through Silver Creek like wildfire, eliciting reactions ranging from warm congratulations to barely concealed disapproval. "Don't you mind those old hens?" Martha advised as she helped Lillian fit the bodice of her wedding dress. "They're just jealous that a handsome man like Adam Reed chose you instead of their daughters or nieces." Lillian smiled at her friend's fierce loyalty. "I don't mind, not really. It's just, I did love Thomas in my way. I don't want people to think I've forgotten him." Martha's expression softened. "Of course you loved him, dear, but loving him doesn't mean you can't love again. The heart has an amazing capacity for growth if we let it." The words echoed Lillian's grandmother's wisdom so closely that she felt a lump form in her throat. "Thank you, Martha, for understanding and for your help with all of this." "Nonsense," Martha said briskly, though her eyes were suspiciously bright. "It's not every day I get to help prepare a bride. Now let's finish this seam before my old eyes give out on me." Sunday dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect summer day that seemed created specifically for beginnings. Lillian woke in her cabin, a flutter of nervous excitement in her stomach. Today she would become Mrs. Adam Reed, a new name to match her new life. Martha arrived shortly after breakfast, arms full of wildflowers for a bridal bouquet and a small jar of rose water for scent. "Something borrowed," she said, producing a delicate lace handkerchief from her pocket. "This was my mother's. You can tuck it in your sleeve for luck." By the time they needed to leave for the church, Lillian was transformed. The cream-colored dress fit perfectly, emphasizing her slender waist and complementing her auburn hair, which Martha had arranged in an elegant knot adorned with tiny white flowers. A touch of rose water behind her ears and at her wrists completed the effect. "You look beautiful," Martha said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. "Adam won't know what hit him." The small church was fuller than usual when they arrived, curiosity having drawn even those who rarely attended services. Lillian waited in the small anteroom while Martha took her seat, aware of the murmured conversations that fell silent as the door opened and closed. Then Reverend Miller appeared, his kind face wreathed in a smile. "It's time, my dear. Are you ready?" Lillian took a deep breath, smoothing the skirt of her dress with suddenly trembling hands. "Yes, I'm ready." As she stepped into the church on the Reverend's arm, having no father or brother to give her away, Lillian's gaze went immediately to the front where Adam stood waiting. He was dressed in a new black suit, his hair neatly combed, his stance straight and proud. But it was his expression that caught and held her a look of such wonder and love that it brought tears to her eyes. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful, with Reverend Miller speaking eloquently about new beginnings and the blessings of love found again. When it came time for the vows, Adam's voice was clear and strong, his hands steady as he placed a simple gold band on Lillian's finger. "I, Adam James Reed, take thee, Lillian Grace O'Brien, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part." Lillian's own voice trembled slightly as she repeated the vows, overwhelmed by the solemnity of the moment and the depth of emotion she saw in Adam's eyes. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Miller declared, beaming at them both. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Reed." Adam's kiss was gentle, respectful of their surroundings, yet imbued with a promise that made Lillian's cheeks flush with anticipation. As they turned to face the congregation, now officially husband and wife, she was surprised to see genuine happiness on many faces, not just Martha's. The small reception at the hotel afterward was a lively affair, with most of the town turning out to congratulate the newlyweds and share in the cake and punch provided by the hotel owner as a wedding gift. Even those who had whispered about the hasty nature of the marriage seemed won over by the obvious joy radiating from the couple. As the afternoon waned, Adam leaned close to Lillian's ear. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Reed?" The new name sent a thrill through her. "Yes, I think I am." They slipped away amid good-natured teasing and a shower of rice. Climbing into the buggy Adam had decorated with ribbons and wildflowers for the occasion. As they drove through town toward their ranch now, Lillian leaned against her husband's shoulder, a contentment she had never known settling deep in her bones. "Happy?" Adam asked, his arm secure around her waist. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. "It still feels like a dream sometimes, meeting you, falling in love, becoming your wife. If someone had told me 6 months ago that this would be my life now, I never would have believed them." Adam's expression grew serious as he guided the horses along the familiar road. "I believe some things are meant to be, Lillian. Not that we don't have choices, we do, but sometimes life puts us exactly where we need to be, with exactly who we need to meet, at precisely the right moment. Like a widow outside a saloon and a cowboy new to town," she suggested with a smile. "Exactly like that," he agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "When I saw you standing there, looking so determined despite your obvious discomfort, something inside me just knew. There she is, it said. The woman you've been waiting for without knowing it." The simple truth of his words brought tears to Lillian's eyes. "I felt it too," she admitted. "Not right away, perhaps, but gradually as we worked together, talked together. It was as if pieces of my heart that had been frozen began to thaw to respond to your kindness and strength." They rode in companionable silence for a time, each lost in thoughts of the journey that had brought them to this moment. As they approached the ranch, the setting sun gilded everything in gold: the weathered barn, the sturdy main house, Lillian's small cabin on the rise, the grazing cattle in the distance. "It's beautiful," Lillian murmured, seeing their home with new eyes. "Our home." Adam drew the buggy to a halt in front of the main house, its windows reflecting the sunset like panes of amber glass. "There's something I need to show you before we go inside," he said, helping her down from the seat. Taking her hand, He led her not toward the house but around it to the back garden where Lillian had spent so many hours cultivating vegetables and flowers. There, in a corner she hadn't visited recently, stood a small structure covered with a canvas tarp. "What is this?" she asked, curious despite her fatigue from the emotional day. Adam's smile was boyishly eager as he pulled away the tarp to reveal a wooden cradle, beautifully crafted with intricate carvings along its sides. "I've been working on it in the evenings," he explained, his voice soft with emotion. "For our children, when they come." The sight of the cradle, tangible evidence of Adam's hope for their future together, broke something open inside Lillian. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she reached out to touch the smooth wood, feeling the love that had gone into every careful cut and polish. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Oh, Adam." He gathered her into his arms, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "I want everything with you, Lillian. A home, children, a lifetime of memories. I want to grow old watching you garden and hearing you laugh. I want to build something lasting together, something that will outlive us both." Lillian raised her face to his, her heart so full it felt like it might burst from her chest. "I want that too, all of it with you." The kiss they shared then was deeper, more passionate than any before it, a promise and a beginning rolled into one. When they finally parted, breathless and a little dazed, Adam swept Lillian into his arms. "Time to carry my bride over the threshold," he said, his voice husky with emotion and desire. As he carried her up the steps and through the door of what was now truly their home, Lillian felt the last of her doubts and fears slip away. Love had found her again, unexpected and all the more precious for it. And in Adam's arms, in the home they would build together, she had found not just a second chance at happiness, but a deeper, richer love than she had ever known was possible. 5 years later, Lillian sat on the wide porch of Reed Ranch, watching Adam teaching their 4-year-old son James to ride his first pony. Beside her in a rocking chair, 2-year-old Elizabeth clutched a cloth doll, her auburn curls so like her mother's catching the summer sunlight. The ranch had prospered beyond their wildest expectations. Adam's careful management and Lillian's practical support had turned it into one of the most successful operations in the territory. The original cabin where Lillian had lived briefly as Adam's employee still stood on its rise, now serving as a guest house for visitors and a reminder of their unusual courtship. "Mama, look." James called, his face alight with pride as he guided the gentle pony in a small circle, Adam's hand resting lightly on his back for support. "I'm riding like Papa." "I see you, darling," Lillian called back, her heart swelling with love for her family. "You're doing wonderfully." As she watched her husband and son, their heads bent together in identical poses of concentration, Lillian felt a familiar flutter beneath her heart, the first movements of their third child, due to arrive with the winter snows. Life wasn't perfect, of course. Montana winters were still harsh, the work of a ranch never ending, and they'd faced their share of challenges: drought, sickness, and the ordinary disagreements of any marriage. But through it all, their love had only deepened, tempered by shared struggles and joys into something as strong and enduring as the mountains that stood sentinel on the horizon. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Reed," came Martha Wilson's voice as she emerged from the house with a tray of lemonade. Now in her 60s, Martha had become like a grandmother to the Reed children, a frequent visitor and dear friend. "Just counting my blessings," Lillian replied, accepting a glass with a grateful smile. "Sometimes I can hardly believe this is my life now." Martha settled into a chair beside her, her wise eyes twinkling. "I remember a young widow who thought her life was over when her first husband died. Hard to reconcile that sad-eyed girl with the woman I see before me now." Lillian laughed softly. "She feels like a different person sometimes, that widow in her black dresses who was told she should forget about love. And instead, love found her again," Martha observed, watching as Adam lifted James from the pony with a whoop of celebration. "Yes," Lillian agreed, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly where new life grew. thanks to a cowboy who saw possibility where others saw only propriety. Adam looked up then, as if sensing her gaze, and the smile he sent her way still had the power to quicken her pulse after all these years. In that smile was everything they had built together: trust, passion, partnership, and a love that had healed what once seemed broken beyond repair. As the Montana sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Lillian silently thanked whatever fate or providence had brought her to that moment outside the Silver Spur Saloon 5 years ago. Life's path was unpredictable, sometimes painful, but occasionally it led exactly where you needed to go, into the arms of someone who could whisper, "Love found you again," and make you believe it with your whole heart.